Thank you very much to everyone for joining us. Welcome to the Central Bank of Malta's webinar called Realising the Full Value of Emerging Technologies. So let me start by introducing Ladan. Ladan is the Senior Principal at Accenture Research. She designs and delivers thought leadership initiatives there. Her research examines issues at the intersection of technology, business and macroeconomics, such as the future of work and technology, inclusive economic growth, and the economic impact of emerging technologies such as the Internet of Things and artificial intelligence. Ladan has over a decade of experience in business research, spanning qualitative and quantitative techniques, economic modeling, design thinking, and scenario analysis. Her insights have been published in nothing short of the Harvard Business Review online, Stanford Social Innovation Review, the European Business Review, and Thunderbird International Business Review, among other publications. I'd now like, before we go to Ladan, can I just introduce our Chief Officer, our Chief Economist, Aaron Grech, who will be discussing a little bit before about the topic chosen by Ms. Davarzani. Aaron, over to you.
Thank you, Vanessa. I'm very pleased to welcome Ladan to this virtual seminar. In itself, it is an example of the topic that we're going to be discussing. At present, it would be impossible for Ladan to be physically in Malta to give this lecture. However, with the technology that we have available, we will be able to share our discussion with her on these emerging technologies. Ladan works with Accenture, which even in its name gives an idea of what the company is about. It's an accent on the future. It's a company that has always looked at the transformational ability of technology and how this can really make substantial changes in the economy. To give you some idea, one of the first pieces of work that Accenture did, or the company preceding Accenture really, was to advise on the first use of a commercial computer in the US. Before, computers used to be just used in the public sector. And of course, as you all know, this has completely changed over time. And we are through what would be called the fourth industrial revolution, with a complete change in the way manufacturing and other industries operate. And the importance of this transformation is accelerating over time. We have seen a complete shift, I think, in attitudes due to the pandemic. Before the pandemic, I think there was a certain element of resistance in certain sectors about the use of digital technology, but the pandemic forced everyone to use technology, maybe in an unplanned way in the first instance, so everyone rushed to organize themselves in a digital way. However, even if I give the simple example of the operation of our institution, the central bank, before we had very little use of teleworking, and most of our functions were done within an office environment, including, for example, trading, securities, economic analysis, statistical analysis. Everything was conducted within an office environment. With the pandemic, we had to shift immediately to delivering all our services from a remote location, most people from their own home. And with the use of tools, digital tools, we managed to produce, I would say, the same kind of output, maybe in some cases even better than we used before. And this has completely transformed, I would say, the way our own institution looks at the digital resources. I think in the case of Malta, the digital transformation is yet another way that will remove us from the periphery. Malta, as you know, geographically is distant from the core European markets, and the most industries face quite considerable issues like transportation of resources, but also we suffer from a lack of labor, skilled labor in certain areas. With the digital transformation, we are realizing that these issues can be tackled through issues like teleworking, the ability to sell online. This has really transformed the capability of the Maltese economy, but especially I would say the services sector, because now services that were traditionally face-to-face have moved online, and Maltese firms are able to deliver their services to clients that are never ever going to come to Malta. So I think it is very important for the Maltese economy to continue to adopt digital technologies, and I trust that the presentation that Ladan will be delivering will continue to showcase how crucial this transformation is for the next stage of our economic development. Over to you, Ladan.
Thank you, Aaron, for the wonderful introduction, and Vanessa. Good morning to everyone. It's a pleasure to join you today. Let me start by sharing my slides, and let me know when you can see it. Can you see my screen now?
All's fine. You can proceed, Ladan. Tell us if you need anything from our side. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. So my presentation is in 3 parts today. I'll start with the impact of the global pandemic on digital transformation, then how emerging technologies can create value and growth, and finally how we can achieve it. I'm also very interested to hear from you today what you're seeing in your business, your experiences with digital technologies, and then maybe some of the barriers and challenges that you're experiencing with them. So please comment in the chat if you have any thoughts or questions, and we can have a fruitful discussion at the end. So as Aaron said, I think we can kind of all agree that COVID-19 has sped up digital transformation efforts across the board. It was about this time in the UK last year where we were heading for our first national lockdown, being told to reduce non-essential travel and contact and really kind of limit our activities. And since then, I think the global pandemic has altered our lives in ways we probably didn't even think was possible just this time last year. And in this kind of effort to kind of carry on with our lives, we shifted our activities offline to online. I'm currently working online, shopping online, learning online, socializing online. And, even some of us are kind of producing goods and services online through kind of 3D printing. I like Satya's Microsoft CEO's take on it. Social distancing rules brought us a remote everything. And we've seen this sudden shift, unprecedented kind of shift in human behavior and culture, really finally kind of catching up with technology. I'd say, COVID-19 has accelerated changes that companies and governments knew were coming, but just didn't really expect to see so soon. So major shifts that were predicted to materialize in years are happening here and now. Trends such as industry convergence, more localized supply chains, mass virtualization, and even the rapidly and continuously changing consumer expectations. So it's really no wonder we've seen organizations really step up to use technology in new, creative and extraordinary ways to keep their businesses and communities running. And the one thing is, at speeds that they thought were previously impossible. So back in March 2020, the UK National Health Service, in a matter of weeks, rolled out Microsoft Teams, the communication platform we're using for the webinar today, to over 1 million of its employees. And the platform just allowed doctors to conduct virtual appointments, allowed the NHS to host virtual events, and just made it easier for kind of staff to communicate and collaborate with one another for those who were kind of stuck in the isolation rooms. And that kind of example just really shows that we can just kind of dispel perceptions of just how fast technology transformation needs to take place. Another example I give you in the UK, again, we faced a critical shortage of ventilators at the beginning of the pandemic, and Rolls-Royce, the car manufacturer, really kind of stepped in, redesigned its entire supply chain to begin producing the medical device. And I think if you'd ask them, how long would it take a manufacturer to pivot from producing power systems to medical equipment, anything less than a few years would have felt like a stretch. And yet within kind of 5 weeks, production was underway. They'd secured the new parts from over 100 suppliers, and production was kind of up and running across 3 different sites. So technology has kind of become a saving grace in this unpredictable time, allowing organizations to minimize the disruptions of the pandemic, but also create new opportunities, new ways of interacting, working together, and really just kind of new ways of doing business. We surveyed over 6,000 business and IT executives across industries in over 30 countries, developed and emerging. And we see that they're scaling up their technology efforts across the board this year, especially in cloud, AI, and Internet of Things, but also experimenting with newer technologies such as 5G, digital twins, and edge computing. So we can see it's not just one technology that holds the key, but I would say the pandemic has really created the perfect storm for cloud technologies, because business processes and capabilities have had to be done virtually over the kind of past year. Cloud spending in the first quarter of 2020 tripled compared to the previous year. And by late last year, 70% of companies told us they had plans to significantly increase spending. Today, I would say about 20 to 30% of work is being done through the cloud. And before the pandemic, initially, companies had planned to accelerate that to 80% over an 8 to 10 year process. But like I said, the virus is just speeding things up. We now see this shift to 80% taking place in the next 3 years. And that's because, companies of all kinds quickly learn that they need cloud technologies to enable their staff to work from home, to ramp up digital commerce, to provide these kind of telehealth, entertaining kind of services, and much more. We also see governments using cloud to transform everything from how they operate to how they partner and create value. In the UK, the Department for Work and Pensions had actually started its cloud journey before the pandemic. So when demand started surging during the pandemic, it was able to quickly identify and scale up those critical services, and even kind of create new services for citizens, to address the kind of unique circumstances they faced. And in kind of a record time, we saw employees create these automated systems for uploading medical records, requesting universal benefit checks, and issuing school meal vouchers. So emerging technologies can help propel companies through the current crisis, but it can also lead to sustained increased growth. And according to our research, companies that are more strategic in their approach to technology are doing better financially. They're achieving more than twice the average revenue growth of companies who are just much slower to implement and just not fully utilizing their technology. We call the companies in the top 10% digital leaders and those in the bottom 25% digital laggards. I think COVID-19 has kind of been a reality check for businesses, as Aaron mentioned, that have just been reluctant to embrace digital transformation, and overnight they've just found themselves completely unprepared to respond to the changes. And now even these digital laggards are scrambling to migrate their operations and workforce to a virtual environment. But I wouldn't say it's kind of game over for them. The virus is creating leapfrogging opportunities for organizations and economies who are really able to kind of put good ideas into practice and just be more nimble than their competitors. Recently, I saw a think tank had estimated China's going to overtake the US as the world's largest economy 5 years ahead of earlier predictions, because of its skillful management of the pandemic, but also its ability to boost growth through technological leapfrogging. So to give you an idea of the impact of these technologies on economic growth, here's some analysis we've done looking at the impact of AI. And we looked at the additional GDP that could be generated from AI, from a kind of baseline scenario of kind of no AI. And the headline message here is that AI could roughly double annual GDP growth rates by 2035. And in some countries, we can see labour productivity boost by up to 40%. We see a couple of channels through which emerging technologies impact growth. Productivity bursts. So, for example, Unilever is teaming up with Microsoft to develop digital twins of its factories and boost productivity. The company's using connected machines to track conditions within the factories, and then it adds machine learning and AI techniques on top to kind of test potential operational changes and improve production efficiency and flexibility. These connected devices send real-time data on production variables like motor speed and temperature to the twin, and the algorithms can map out the best operational conditions. Unilever reports that its pilot twin in Brazil has saved them millions of dollars by cutting energy use and increasing productivity between 1% to 3%. Augmentation. Emerging technologies can augment and complement the existing skills of the workforce, as well as kind of physical capital. So, we see doctors are using AI technologies to support the work they're doing, really speed up and improve the accuracy of their diagnosis, especially for kind of rare diseases, which are commonly misdiagnosed and often in many cases more serious. New market opportunities. 95% of companies told us that they're seeking new ways of engaging customers as a result of COVID-19. So we've seen during this pandemic new food delivery platforms pop up, the rise of telehealth services. Huge value is going to come from these new goods and services and experiences that these emerging technologies are enabling. And finally, we've got faster cycles of innovation. Emerging technologies can really completely transform the pace of innovation, the pace of product development. For instance, Ford uses Microsoft's HoloLens to let designers quickly model out changes to cars and trucks without having to build every single design prototype with clay. So they're allowing companies to just basically complete more product testing in simulation, meaning that they can kind of put off the physical manufacturing for much longer, saving time and money. And they're also kind of, really kind of shrinking the kind of design and manufacturing timelines of once kind of human machines kind of start working together. And we see cities are starting to use intelligent twins, really kind of driven by AI systems to bring together data on various things like traffic, weather, infrastructure, and other resources to innovate in new areas such as urban mobility, emergency planning, and energy usage. In order to kind of generate this growth we've been kind of talking about, we see organizations adopting technology to spawn these new capabilities and applications. But investment into technology innovation is very different from realizing value from it. And we see many companies and economies are still struggling to capture that value. That's because countries must really kind of recognize the difference between adopting a technology and generating economic rewards from it. The first idea is very much around kind of technological diffusion, and the second is around the kind of economic diffusion of the technology. And throughout history, we've seen countries outperform others when it really comes to capitalizing on the economic potential of these technologies. In this chart here, we've got an example of how the US led the race for electrification. Many of its kind of closest competitors started off from the same point and had access to the same technology, but the US had the right enabling kind of conditions for the economic diffusion of electricity. And this is because, this involved economy-wide changes, including building new electric factories and reorganizing labor and production methods. So, for instance, instead of workers lumbering around a static workstation, electric assembly lines brought the parts to the workers, and this kind of vastly increased efficiency and output. And at the same time, workers were kind of reskilled to use the new technology. So by the 1950s, around 94% of households had access to electricity. And then this fueled demand for consumer products, a lot of kind of, white goods, hoovers, washing machines, really establishing this consumer market for electric household appliances and bringing about that human change, behavioral change and cultural change. So the US had the right kind of enabling conditions, what we call national absorptive capacity, to reap the rewards of the technology across various sectors and industries. So this national absorptive capacity is kind of central to this idea of economic diffusion we talk about, and it measures the extent to which a country can integrate new technologies into its economy and generate benefits from it. So we see it as a kind of much wider set of political, economic, social factors that contribute to how a country will make use of these kind of new technologies. We've broken it down into 4 pillars. Business commons really kind of describes the business climate and pool of resources on which companies can draw on to carry out their operations. It's really about building the kind of right foundations. Key components into this pillar include an educated workforce, sophisticated financial system, good rule of law, and good governance. We've then got the kind of takeoff factors, which really help transform the technology into usable applications, into usable products and services, and then contribute to the scaling of that technology beyond niche sectors and players. Key components going into here are, the presence of high-tech firms, a strong STEM workforce, government support for R&D in emerging technologies. And, this is all kind of coupled with growth of the middle class on the kind of demand side. Transfer factors enable the technology to become far more deeply ingrained in the economy. They're the ones that kind of induce the organizational, the social transformations for those who adopt it. So change is less about the technology itself and more about the business, how business and society adapts to it. Key components here are exchange of knowledge, formal or informal, shifts in social and company norms, business models and practices that really kind of make harnessing the new technology possible. So if we think about that kind of US example, we're talking about kind of, change in kind of working practices, change in the way that labour was kind of organised to conduct those activities. And then finally, Innovation Dynamo describes a point at which the technology is so ubiquitous that its presence is assumed and it's integrated into an array of different innovations. Key components going into kind of here are companies' market strategies, the health of the research ecosystem, and the strength of entrepreneurialism in the country. So we took this framework and we looked at a number of emerging and developed countries to see how they perform on this index. Nations in higher positions on the index are more likely to reap the rewards of tech diffusion. Our model shows that there's certainly kind of leaders, US, Switzerland, some Nordic countries are ahead, but really kind of every country has kind of room for improvement and some more on certain pillars than others. We can take this kind of NAC index and apply it to various technologies. And here we see the impact on the Internet of Things. We modeled the potential GDP impact of Internet of Things here under two different scenarios. The first one is very much kind of, under kind of business as kind of usual, current conditions. So we just took the current position on the NAC index and projected investment levels. The second, we run the kind of thought experiment, what happens if countries were able to improve their national absorptive capacity and increase their kind of investments into IoT technologies. And here we found that kind of, GDP would jump by up to 4 trillion during the same period. So we see through the kind of, this sort of analysis, through our AI analysis, that exponential kind of technologies and smart machines could really be a force for faster growth for economies. They're changing the way we work, how we work, what we do. And, some of the fastest growing jobs over the next decade didn't even exist 20 years ago. But they also bring a lot of kind of challenges, especially on the social side. People are concerned that they could lead to job losses and displacement of skills. They could erode incomes and worsen inequality. We've definitely seen during, this pandemic that it can increase the digital divide further between citizens who have access to the technology and know how to use it to those without. And it's also kind of bringing up ethical and moral concerns about how smart machines will make decisions. For instance, if we take kind of driverless cars, whose life would they prioritize if in case of an accident? Is it kind of humans over pets? Is it the passenger versus the driver and so forth? So these kind of issues really highlight we need to think beyond the technology to consider the wider economic and social dimensions. Those business and policy discussions are vital to mitigating these downside risks, and even as the kind of OECD has been kind of doing, really important to kind of engage the public on these issues and understand kind of their kind of perspectives as well. And it'd be great to get your thoughts on how we do this and how we kind of manage the transitions as well. So here's a few kind of guidelines for harnessing the potential of these new technologies. There's no one-size-fits-all solution here. I think countries need to assess their specific historical and economic circumstances. Explore new economic and business models and partnerships. Emerging technologies are really allowing the boundaries between organizations to disappear and just opening up the potential for new partnerships, non-traditional partnerships, to really kind of solve many of the kind of significant challenges that we face. And governments can really kind of draw on their powerful network of stakeholders, industry, academia, non-government organizations to share ideas and leading practices and identify areas of mutual interest. They also play a good role in kind of in increasing kind of collaboration partnership among businesses, so between global and large, regional companies, small, medium enterprises and startups. And I'd say, South Korea has been doing this for a very long time. Initially under its Creative Economy Initiative, it brought together the large companies, its chaebols and municipalities to establish innovation centres. And more recently under the New Deal, where it kind of plans to digitize industries through 5G, AI, big data, it's really helping connect SMEs with startups. So it's also almost kind of like moving to this new economic model away from the chaebols to building this kind of startup culture and ecosystem. Optimize human-machine collaboration. I think the more we put into kind of honing digital skills, the better the population can adjust to the digital transformation efforts happening in our economies. I don't think this means, that we all need to become expert coders, but we increasingly need to understand more about the tools at our disposal, the logic of machines, and how to see kind of technology as not just as a tool, but as a solution. And I think this means kind of, we need to integrate human intelligence with machine intelligence so that we have this two-way learning relationship. Currently, a lot of kind of technological education goes in one direction, where people learn how to use machines. Increasingly, this will change as machines learn from humans and humans learn from machines. So we really kind of need to re-evaluate the skills and knowledge that we impart to future generations. The good news here is that employees that we kind of talk to are very excited about the possibilities of these new technologies. An Accenture survey highlighted that the majority of managers really believe machines will make them more effective and their work more interesting. So it's important that we actually empower employees with these tools. And for instance, they can kind of pick and choose for themselves what to automate, allowing them to focus on the things they really like doing and the things that they kind of do best. One thing that we see with digital leaders in this space is that they make sure that their talent is not afraid to experiment with these tools, and and that they're comfortable kind of presenting out of box ideas, if you like, which means that I think ultimately people have to have trust and confidence in the people they work for, and the people they work for includes the machines increasingly. So things like responsible AI become very important. Play to the country's strengths, assess where you can use emerging technologies to strengthen existing comparative advantages, or areas where you've got a kind of comparative advantage in innovation. For instance, there are many areas where the UK has international comparative advantage in clean technologies, and where the economic benefits felt might be large. And I would say, let's also consider, what we've done during the pandemic and more recent times, and new areas where we've potentially established some advantages in. So for the UK, this is very much about sustaining the gains we've made in health digital services. Don't wait to experiment with emerging technologies. Experimenting early is really the best way to start socializing and imagining the commercial possibilities. Piloting programs can really help raise business awareness of the benefits. So, we've seen a lot of kind of pilot programs in the UK around kind of self-driving cars, and then they open up I think opportunities for both traditional and new service industries to identify areas of kind of mutual interest. And again, kind of, it's just sharing success stories throughout the business community to spur other companies, entrepreneurs into action can really just help shorten that investment lag that we sometimes see with new technologies. And finally, accelerated adapt responses to labour market transitions. So before the pandemic, there was already kind of concerns around the impact of technology on jobs, with some groups more disproportionately affected by the changes. So, low-skilled jobs being more susceptible to automation. Now we see kind of rising unemployment and even more labour market displacement that the pandemic has caused. So we really need to think about bold programmes that will train and reskill workers, especially those groups which are more at high risk. And that includes younger workers in many economies, and how we just go about just kind of building a more kind of inclusive workforce. On the positive side, the virus has really kind of led to the rapid development of digital skills among citizens. So I think now's the perfect time to start thinking about institutionalizing the development of everyday digital skills, as well as the kind of deeper digital skills required by business and governments more generally. Here's some further reading materials I've referred to in kind of today's presentation, but let me just stop here for questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ladan. That was absolutely fascinating. I think it's amazing to say that 30% of the work is now being done through the cloud, and what was going to be done in 10 years is now, you think, going to be achieved in 3. Ladan also told us that artificial intelligence should actually double economic growth in the 12 countries by 2035, which is actually quite significant, especially since we're going through such a slow economic phase at the moment. You also gave a very strong warning that technology doesn't necessarily mean value, and that people need to generate value from the technology they have adopted. I think it's also quite significant that your NAC index correlated quite closely with the World Economic Forum competitiveness index in terms of the countries. So clearly this is already something that we have been seeing, that the adoption of technology has helped a great deal. We have already got a question in the chat. Before we start, would you like to just take down your presentation? Perhaps we can invite Aaron. Aaron, did you want to pose the first question?
Yes, I can.
And then we'll come to you, William. Thank you.
So I think the numbers that we were talking about the impact of AI on economic growth are very reassuring, in the sense that this is happening at a time when most economists were worried about one big demographic challenge that all Western countries were facing. As you all know, with aging, the supply of workers was going to collapse in many countries. Even countries like Germany are now facing a decline in absolute numbers of their workforce. Even with increasing retirement ages, this demographic challenge will stay there. In the next few decades, our economies would have faced stagnation because of the lack of labor. So this new injection of technology and its impact on productivity comes at a time when it is very much needed. The aspect that I would like to question you about is this digital transformation is also happening at a time when most Western economies are quite concerned, and they're trying to change the way they operate to face another big challenge, which is the challenge of climate change. Have you done any research, or are you aware of any research that looks into how AI can help, and other technologies besides AI can help countries to achieve the very, very ambitious targets that they've got in terms of the reduction of carbon emissions. In countries like our own, for example, we are planning to cut carbon emissions by half in a matter of just a few years, which, when you consider that these carbon emissions are embedded in the technology that we use to conduct all of our everyday activities, from the simple act of going to work, is very, very ambitious. So definitely, without some major change in our technology, these targets are very hard to achieve. Thank you.
First of all, let me just put the caveat out there that that modeling analysis for AI was done pre-COVID. Obviously, if we redid it right now, we would expect some changes to that. But I think the kind of overall kind of headline message is that AI has the kind of potential to really help economies boost growth. And as you say, kind of, Aaron, you know, we're doing a lot of work right now with our clients around that kind of sustainability agenda, around that kind of responsible AI agenda, and I think there's kind of huge potential there. There's many examples that we're already kind of seeing and materialize with our kind of clients and helping, you know, as I kind of mentioned through the Unilever example, for instance, that I gave in terms of helping how the kind of digital twins, AI systems are helping to kind of reduce energy usage. And I think there's just countless examples out there around that. So that's definitely a bigger priority, I think, as you say, post kind of pandemic. And I think one that's definitely going to grow and be kind of central to a lot of kind of companies' agendas going forward.
Thank you, Ladan. Before we start taking the questions, let me just tell you that the audience includes a number of people from some of the regulators on the island, some of the quangos, like the tech industry, digital agendas, etc. A lot of private companies involved in digital transformation and so on, unions, and also academics. William, if you'd like to just turn off your camera, and I'll just read out the questions if you don't mind, because they're pouring in. The gentleman who was just on the screen now represents the Confederation of Malta Trade Unions, and his question was, in your opinion, would emerging technology create self-sustaining innovation and development guarantee economic and social balance? We also have a question from somebody within the bank, so I'll read out two at a time. William Gutt-Fenech is asking, you project a doubling of economic growth through AI, but who's likely to become redundant as a result? Is it low, medium, or high skilled workers? So let's start with those two, please. Thank you.
Thank you. I've forgotten the first question. I'll start with the second and we'll go back to the first. So in terms of, as I mentioned, you know, the kind of new technologies will have an impact on the workforce. We're already kind of seeing it happen. And you know, in terms of kind of low, middle, high, it's almost, you know, a polarization where we've got some kind of low skill kind of tasks which are, you know, low and middle in general are more susceptible, if you like, to a lot of the kind of automation. But you know, there's some skills in there, such as you know, being a carer, providing health services, which really kind of, as we, you know, in the kind of the pandemic, you know, has just kind of exacerbated that, which really has to just be done in person. So there'll be kind of huge demand in those areas, in food delivery services and so forth. And then there's a kind of high skills where We're also seeing kind of automation happen in many of those, at least, in certain parts of the job tasks and such. So I think it's going to affect everybody. But really, I would say that it's kind of polarization where we kind of see a lot of those middle skills disappearing, and then that's kind of important area that we need to really be thinking about, how we kind of retrain and restructure those kind of jobs. And I think your first question was around kind of can technologies become self-sustaining innovation and create economic and social balance? No, by itself, I don't think so. And I think that's where we need to kind of step in and mitigate a lot of those kind of downside risks. There's always going to be winners and losers to some extent, and it's about trying to kind of manage those transitions, as I kind of talked about.
Ladan, we have some other questions as well with regards to the adoption and how it affects things. We have Jürgen Sherry asked whether businesses would regress this pace of technology digitization if the COVID situation starts to get better. We also have Brian McAuliffe, who you know from the central bank, who's asking whether the role of organization restructuring would help us to reap the benefits of these emerging technologies, whether obviously we need to have a look internally as well as just take on these changes.
So the first question was, I think it's really interesting that during the pandemic, we saw everyone accelerate their kind of digital transformation, some more than others, but everyone kind of stepped up. So I think that's one thing that's kind of been interesting, as Aaron said, even those people who've been very kind of reluctant, and everybody's kind of seen the benefits. In some ways, I really don't think they can step away. I think consumer kind of expectations and behavior has changed so much. Definitely, there could be less urgency with some things, but things like moving their operations into the cloud, and they've seen the kind of huge cost savings, there's huge kind of benefits, the new market revenue opportunities it's opening up. So I think there may be, for the majority, I don't really kind of see it slowing down. Some maybe spend a bit less, but I think it's all kind of marginal. I think it's become almost technology strategy has become very much core to the kind of business strategy, and it's become much more closely aligned during this kind of pandemic than ever before. And I think it'll be very hard to kind of break away from that.
We have a question from Gerasimos Papalaventis, who's asking whether blockchain would have as much of an impact as AI. And we also have our information security officer, Daniel German, asking about the dangers cyber criminals being able to use, once everything is out there, what is the problems? And my own question would also be, what about privacy? We're sort of now used to being online. We used to worry about social media. Are there implications also for this?
Yeah. So blockchain is another one of those kind of exponential technologies we're definitely kind of looking at, and again, to kind of Aaron's point about very much kind of doing a lot of work around the kind of sustainability agenda in relation to that. So definitely a kind of another kind of key one to be looking at. And in terms of the kind of your question on privacy, data security, yes, of course, key issue, key priority for companies as we're thinking about these kind of emerging technologies. And I think those kind of privacy, again, we go back to kind of those privacy concerns and they've really evolved through, among citizens. They've really kind of evolved throughout the kind of last year as we've kind of been all more going online. And I think this is again another area where I feel like, engaging kind of citizens in those discussions, understanding more about the issues, about how we want this to develop. I don't think the onus is just on kind of business or government, but it's about trying to create this kind of mutual understanding and cooperation about where we want to head into as a society. So I think yeah, these are definitely all kind of key concerns, and we do a lot of work at a kind of Accenture around the whole kind of cybersecurity kind of agenda, and it's definitely one of the kind of biggest kind of threats now facing
it's like the vaccines. People are asking, gosh, they were developed so quickly. We're all was there enough time really to absorb all the checks and balances that we need? And I think probably people have the same concern about all of these technologies which have just appeared overnight. We have a few more questions. Matthew Sherry here is now asking about the biggest obstacles with regards to technology, particularly with AI, quantum computing and Internet of Things. And we have a comment from Joseph Samut, who is saying that he thinks that definitely the skill requirements will drift to higher value skills, such as data scientists and data AI experts. But he is pointing out that the opportunities for Malta lie in the development of these technologies and not only their adoption. We also have Alfred Mifsud, who is saying that Florida is in fact using it as a competitive advantage to draw talent from New York. And he's saying maybe the Mediterranean countries, do we have the possibility to attract business from the north? And yeah, and then Joseph Summers made another comment. So I'll leave you with those questions.
I'll try to remember them as best as I can. So definitely, cybersecurity is an area where we need more kind of experts in, and I would say, one thing is about with kind of digital skills. Yes, we need kind of more data scientists, more cybersecurity specialists, and then so forth. But these also have to be very much kind of complemented with soft skills, because the more kind of we're using kind of these kind of machines, the more onus will be put on things like communication skills, on kind of problem solving, on kind of being able to kind of make right judgments. So I think as much as kind of the hard technical skills are important, so are the kind of softer skills, and those hard kind of technical skills, companies are finding it difficult to fill those, and we just need to become a bit more kind of creative around how we even kind of structure work and break up tasks, so that there was a kind of really good example where Bank of America had a huge kind of shortage of data scientists, and what they actually did was just break down the job into much smaller tasks. They reorganized the work, and they actually found that they didn't need as many data scientists as they thought, and that a lot of their own kind of current workforce could actually fill those gaps. And that comes back to my point about empowering our current workforce, understanding their kind of skills profile, and kind of bridging that gap. So
this takes us back to the question earlier on about restructuring. So this is also very important, that companies actually realize what they actually need to be able to adopt this technology.
That's right. And then just kind of linking it back to kind of Aaron's point, that he was talking about Germany and aging populations, and the kind of skill shortages that will come from that. I mean, Germany's been kind of pretty lucky that it's been able to high levels of kind of migration have put that off, but it's a problem that won't kind of disappear, and we need to really look at also widening our talent pools to kind of maybe non-traditional workers that companies have generally just maybe not really considered as much. So people who may have left the workforce because of caring responsibilities or ex-offenders, people with a history of drug and alcohol abuse or whatever. How can we really kind of widen that talent pool to really kind of tap into 100% of the labour pool and really think about our workforce quite differently?
So this is one of the questions that Matthew Sherry asked about the obstacles to adoption. Clearly, the skills requirement and the need for training is something. But is there anything else that you would identify? What is the biggest bottleneck, so to speak?
I don't think there's one thing. There's kind of many things that kind of play into it. One thing that we kind of definitely see with companies in terms of just the kind of technology adoption is the kind of need to integrate these with their kind of legacy systems. So the reality is that a lot of companies have got these kind of huge systems which have been in place for many years, and how do you kind of implement these kind of new technologies, not just as kind of bolt-ons onto the old system, but how do you kind of adapt those legacy systems, and then obviously the kind of huge cost kind of involved with that. So that's something that we do a lot of kind of work with clients on, and I think another kind of issue is, again, just raised on this call, was the whole kind of security and privacy issues. Clients are worried about putting their operations online. In some ways, the pandemic just kind of pushed them to do it. But that was kind of one of the kind of obstacles, and now they're worried about how they kind of keep their data safe and such. So kind of I think lots of kind of different obstacles, but working kind of through them in different ways.
We had the question from former central bank employee, Deputy Governor Alfred Massoud, on the whether there is a competitive advantage for Malta, whether we can tap into that. And somebody else also asked whether we have opportunities here in Malta. I'm not sure if it's fair to dump that question on you, but if anybody else would like to answer that question, I'm sure it would be very interesting as a point of discussion.
I'm by no means a Malta expert, so I'll leave this with Aaron.
Aaron, perhaps you can guide us with this?
Yes, I think like other revolutions, like other technological revolutions, like the revolutions that introduced, like for example, the containers. Anything that makes Malta get less peripheral gives us a chance to increase our economic value added. And as I said, first with the internet, but then with all these new technologies, the ability of someone in Malta to actually produce value, if he has the skills and the ideas, has increased greatly. Because distance and geographic position has nothing to do with the sort of value that you can create. So being in the middle of London and being in a village in Malta, if you have the right toolkit, if you have the right ideas, you get the same result, basically. So it really opens up a lot of opportunities, but at the same time, it does that to all other countries in the world. So services that we used to sell to others, now others can sell to Europe. So it has opened up a lot of markets for us, but it's also exposed us to a lot of more competition. But the main selling point of the Maltese, let's call it services, export-oriented services, was the quality of life. So if you're able to deliver consultancy from Malta and enjoy a very nice lifestyle here, a Mediterranean lifestyle, yes, that is a selling point to someone who is working in a very urbanized environment with maybe weather that is not as nice as that in Malta. So there is definitely that opportunity to sell Malta as a nice location from where to operate for knowledge workers. But as was said, it's not a question of just having a computer. You have to have the right digital infrastructure. You have to still have investment in communications. To give you one example, since everyone now is using Teams, we've realized that the carrying capacity of our digital network here in Malta is fairly limited. There are certain times when you cannot really have the same quality of communications that you have at other times. So it's not costless. You have to invest in the network, and you have to invest in knowledge. One thing that I think is very clear in my mind, just to talk of my own profession, economists before, you wouldn't touch data, you just analyzed. So somebody else did the data compilation and the data analysis, and you just studied the data. Nowadays, economists are nearly programmers. They write programs. They have to. The young economists that I've got, they're very skilled. I would have called them somebody in IT before to do that sort of stuff. So it's this integration of the new technology in older professions that I think will make the quantum jump in value. We cannot treat information technology as the preserve of certain people only, because if that happens, then you have a bottleneck, and this is what happened in many companies. The IT was seen as the job of just one department, and the other departments then never really understood how IT can help them to improve their value added. So when you start to have IT savvy people in other departments, you start to see the flowering of the transformation. So it's this change in mentality and this more open approach towards using technology that will lead to the success of the transformation. Because otherwise, if it's only up to experts, the adoption of technology will remain very, very slow, because a lot of people didn't even know about these technologies, like the ability to use Microsoft Teams, Zoom, working remotely. That existed 10 years ago, 9 years ago. Nobody knew of it, so nobody used it. Nowadays, it's there, and people know about it, and they're using it. So with other technologies, the more people start to understand them and adopt them in their everyday life, I think then it will start to become a real digital society.
Aaron, thank you very much. Ladan, we're run out of time. There are still some very interesting questions, but you can have a look at them on the chat afterwards. I'm sure. Thank you very much to everyone for questions. Would you like to make a closing remark before I round up?
Thank you very much, everyone. It's been an interesting session and lots of kind of interesting questions, which I hope we can kind of get into more detail maybe at some other time. I did just see one last final one from kind of Luke, who said that innovation seems to be kind of very much focused on incremental, if you like, innovation, and I agree. You know, there's different types of innovation. A lot of what we see is incremental, but it's when you have those more deep changes in the organizational structure that really start to affect, you know, company-wide changes. So agree, there's different types of innovation, and that we need to really be focused on. You know, those incremental changes are very important. You know, they help companies save money, but it's also important to be focused on those kind of, you know, deep organizational structural changes that can really have a huge impact. But thank you very much, everyone.
Ladan, it's been an absolute delight having you with us. Thank you so much for sharing this insight with us. Thank you to over 100 people who joined this, and I'm sure lots of other people will see the recording. I remind you that the recording will be up on our website as soon as possible. Don't forget as well, follow us on Central Bank of Malta events on Facebook, LinkedIn, on Twitter, and subscribe to our website newsletter so that you can be kept up to date with all the technology. Thank you to Brian, Mikhalef and Aaron from our economics department, our communications department for putting all this together, and obviously to our governor for allowing us to go ahead with this. Thank you very much to everyone and well done.